The moment my manager shook her hand instead of mine, I felt something inside my chest crack so loud I was sure everyone in the room heard it. Not the polite kind of crack either, the kind that splits bone from bone, the kind that changes how you breathe forever. Because that handshake wasn't just congratulations. It was my promotion, the one I had worked 3 years for, the one I stayed late nights for, the one I sacrificed weekends, birthdays, sleep, and sanity for. The one that was supposed to finally prove I wasn't invisible anymore, and it was now sitting comfortably in the manicured grip of the woman who had stolen it. Before I tell you how this story ends, and trust me, you'll want to hear the ending, do me a favor real quick. Drop your country in the comments so I know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button if you love intense real-life stories like this, and share this video with someone who believes in karma. All right, let me take you back to where this nightmare really began. Her name was Cassandra. Everyone called her Cass. She had the kind of smile that felt rehearsed, wide, charming, practiced in the mirror until it could melt managers and disarm suspicion in seconds. She dressed sharp, spoke confidently, laughed at the boss's jokes just a beat louder than everyone else, and somehow always knew when to compliment the right person at the right moment. If the office were a stage, Cass wasn't just acting in the play. She was auditioning for the spotlight every single day. I, on the other hand, was the opposite. I kept my head down, did my work, delivered results, cleaned up messes no one else wanted, fixed broken systems quietly, trained new hires, solved problems before they became problems. I believe performance spoke louder than personality. Turns out I was painfully wrong. When the promotion was first announced internally, my manager, Greg, called me into his office and said, "You're the strongest candidate. Keep doing what you're doing." Those words stayed in my head like a promise. The role was team lead, more responsibility, higher pay, visibility, authority. It wasn't just a title. It was leverage for my future. It meant I could finally stop feeling like a replaceable background character in my own career. Cass congratulated me that same day. "I heard you're basically a shoo-in," she said, leaning against my desk with that signature grin. "You deserve it. Seriously." Her tone sounded genuine. Her eyes didn't. I thanked her anyway. I didn't know that was the day she started planning. At first, everything felt normal. We still collaborated on projects, still attended meetings, still exchanged polite small talk about deadlines and deliverables. But slowly, subtly, small things began shifting. Documents I uploaded would mysteriously disappear from shared folders. Emails I sent would somehow never reach certain stakeholders. Meeting notes I prepared would get overwritten with updated versions that weren't mine, versions that subtly reframe contributions. Once during a team presentation, Cass casually referenced a process improvement idea that I had pitched privately to Greg 2 weeks earlier. She didn't even look at me when she said it. Greg nodded approvingly. "Great thinking, Cass." My mouth opened slightly, closed again. Maybe it was coincidence, I told myself. Maybe she had the same idea independently. Maybe I was being paranoid. But deep down, a knot started forming in my gut. Then came the performance reviews. Greg called me in and leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Your technical output is strong," he said slowly, "but I'm hearing concerns about your leadership visibility." "From who?" I asked. He hesitated. "Multiple sources." That word, multiple, felt heavy and vague in the worst way. I walked out of that office confused and uneasy. I worked harder, volunteered more, spoke up more in meetings, documented everything, sent follow-up emails summarizing decisions and contributions. But Cass, she evolved. She started positioning herself as the unofficial team coordinator, sending group messages with subtle authority, offering to help manage tasks, speaking confidently about initiatives she hadn't actually built. She framed herself as the glue holding everything together. People started going to her first, and every time I tried to assert clarity or ownership, I somehow came off as defensive or territorial. That's how manipulation works. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, invisibly, like erosion. Then the rumor reached me. A coworker I trusted pulled me aside near the break room. "Hey," he said cautiously, glancing around. I don't want to start drama, but Cass has been telling people you're difficult to work with. My stomach dropped. What? I asked. She says you don't collaborate well, that you get possessive over projects, that you shut down feedback. I laughed weakly. That's insane. He shrugged. I figured you should know. That night I barely slept. I replayed every interaction in my head, every meeting, every email, every conversation, searching for moments where her narrative might stick. The scariest part wasn't the lies. It was how believable they sounded when framed strategically. Cass wasn't attacking me directly. She was shaping perception. By the time the final promotion interviews arrived, the air felt tense in a way I couldn't fully explain. Greg asked me questions that felt different. How do you handle conflict? How do you manage competing personalities? How would your peers describe your collaboration style? I answered honestly, confidently. But something felt off. When Cass walked out of her interview later that day, she looked radiant. She caught my eye and smiled. That same rehearsed smile. 2 days later, the team was called into the conference room. Greg cleared his throat. We're excited to announce that Cassandra will be stepping into the team lead role effective immediately. Applause filled the room. My hands stayed frozen in my lap. Cass pretended to look surprised. Hand over mouth, eyes wide. The performance of a lifetime. Then she stood up, hugged Greg, and thanked everyone graciously. She walked past me and whispered softly, "No hard feelings, right?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Inside my chest, something heavy settled. Betrayal mixed with humiliation. Anger mixed with disbelief. I wasn't just disappointed. I felt erased. That afternoon, I sat at my desk staring at my screen, unable to focus on anything. My inbox flooded with congratulatory emails for Cass, Slack messages praising her leadership, smiling emojis everywhere. Meanwhile, no one said a word to me, not one. The silence hurt more than the loss. I considered quitting. I even opened job boards that night. But then something shifted inside me. Not rage, not revenge, resolve. If Cass thought she had won, she didn't realize the game wasn't over yet. Because what she stole wasn't just a title. She had stolen my trust. And I was done playing nice. The next morning, I started paying attention differently. Not emotionally, strategically. I watched how Cass operated now that she had authority, how she delegated, how she communicated, how she documented, how she took credit, how she avoided accountability. Patterns emerged quickly. She rushed decisions without understanding technical implications. She overpromised timelines to leadership. She forwarded emails selectively. She subtly positioned others as fall guys when things slipped. And most importantly, she left trails, careless trails, screenshots, version histories, metadata timestamps, meeting recordings, Slack logs. Evidence doesn't announce itself. It waits patiently for someone who knows how to look. I started quietly collecting, not to attack, to protect the truth. Weeks passed. Cass grew bolder, more dominant, more reckless. Her charm started cracking under pressure. Deadlines slipped, clients complained, confusion increased, morale dipped. Greg called more meetings. Cass always had an excuse, a vendor delay, a misunderstanding, a team miscommunication, someone else's mistake, never hers. And every time she subtly redirected blame, sometimes toward me. I heard whispers again. Greg thinks you're resisting Cass's leadership. She says you're not supportive of her transition. She told him you're creating friction. I smiled calmly on the outside. Inside, I kept documenting. Then one afternoon, fate handed me the opening I didn't even know I was waiting for. A high-stakes project, the kind leadership watches closely, began spiraling. Deliverables were misaligned. Client expectations were wrong. Internal documentation contradicted itself. Everyone was confused. Greg scheduled an emergency review meeting with upper management. Cass was sweating. I could see it in her posture, in the way her voice tightened, in the way her smile disappeared faster than usual. This meeting would expose everything, if the truth surfaced, and I was ready. The conference room felt colder than usual that morning. like the air conditioning had been turned down just to match the tension in the building. The glass walls reflected nervous faces, flickering laptop screens, half-empty coffee cups abandoned in quiet panic. Cass sat at the head of the table. Her posture was straight, chin lifted, but her fingers tapped lightly against her notebook in a rhythm that betrayed her nerves. She kept checking her phone as if waiting for a miracle email that would fix everything before leadership walked in. Greg entered with two senior directors behind him, people who rarely attended operational meetings unless something was seriously wrong. That alone told me this wasn't just a routine check-in. This was an audit in disguise. "All right," Greg said, closing the door. "Let's walk through the project timeline, deliverables, and where things went off track." Cass launched into her presentation. Slides moved quickly. Bullet points summarized progress optimistically. Charts looked polished. Language was carefully vague. "We experienced a few unexpected alignment issues," she said smoothly, "but the team is recalibrating and we're confident we'll recover quickly." One of the directors leaned forward. "Alignment issues how?" Cass hesitated for half a second. Barely noticeable to most people, but I caught it. "Well," she said, "some of the original documentation had gaps, and there were some communication inconsistencies early on." Her eyes flicked toward me for just a moment. There it was, the setup. Greg glanced in my direction too, his brow slightly furrowed. My heartbeat stayed steady, because this time, I wasn't walking in blind. I raised my hand calmly. "Would it be helpful if I clarified the documentation timeline?" I asked. Cass stiffened. Greg nodded. "Sure." I connected my laptop to the screen. A folder opened, neatly organized, time-stamped, versioned. "This is the original project scope document," I said, opening the file. "Created on March 4th, shared with the team that same afternoon." I clicked to show the metadata: date, time, author, version history, then another file. "This is the revised scope document that introduced the conflicting requirements. It was uploaded on March 18th by Cass." Silence settled over the room. Cass opened her mouth, then closed it. I continued evenly. "Here's the Slack thread where I flagged the inconsistencies immediately and asked for clarification." Messages appeared on the screen. My message. Her response. "Looks good to proceed." Then another. "And here's the meeting recording where we reviewed the finalized scope. The timeline aligns with the original version." I hit play for a few seconds. My voice echoed in the room from weeks earlier. Cass shifted in her seat. One of the directors narrowed his eyes. "So the inconsistency originated after the revision?" "Yes," I said simply, "and I documented the risk at the time." Cass cleared her throat. "I may have misunderstood some of the client inputs," she said quickly, "but the team also—" I clicked again. "Here's the client email confirming the requirements," I said. The room grew very quiet. Greg leaned back slowly. The directors exchanged glances. Cass's confident aura was cracking like thin ice. But this wasn't about humiliating her. It was about reality surfacing. Greg turned to Cass. "Why wasn't this escalated?" Cass swallowed. "I thought we could resolve it internally." One director said calmly, "By overriding documented scope without alignment?" Cass didn't answer. The meeting ended with leadership requesting a full audit of the project documentation and communication trail. As people packed up their laptops, Cass avoided eye contact with me entirely. For the first time since the promotion, she looked small, but I knew better than to celebrate too early. Manipulators don't collapse in one moment. They adapt, and Cass adapted fast. That afternoon, she messaged me privately. "Nice ambush," she wrote. I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. I clarified facts. "Don't play innocent," she typed back. "You're trying to make me look incompetent. I'm protecting the project." She left the conversation unread. The atmosphere in the office shifted over the next few days. People became cautious around Cass. She became quieter in meetings. Her charm turned brittle. Leadership started asking more direct questions instead of accepting surface answers. And quietly, subtly, people began coming to me again for clarification, validation, and technical grounding. Not officially, but organically, Cass noticed. Her control was slipping. That's when she made her biggest mistake. One evening, after most people had left, I was finishing up documentation when I heard Ray's voices coming from a nearby conference room. The door was slightly ajar. Cass was inside with Greg. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices carried. "I feel like you're undermining me," Cass said sharply. "I'm asking for accountability," Greg replied. "You're letting him make me look bad." A pause. "Your decisions are making you look bad," Greg said quietly. "Not him." Silence followed. Then Cass's voice dropped into something colder. "If this continues, you're going to lose him. He's not a team player." That sentence sent a chill through me. She was still trying to poison the well. I stepped away before I heard more. That night, I backed up everything. Every file, every email, every chat, every recording. Because something told me this wasn't over yet. A week later, the audit results came back. The findings were uncomfortable. Several project delays traced directly to undocumented changes. Missed approvals, inconsistent communication patterns, selective forwarding of information. Greg scheduled a private meeting with Cass. She didn't come back smiling. 2 days later, leadership announced a temporary restructuring. Project authority would be redistributed. Cass would retain her title, but her decision-making power would be limited until further notice. It wasn't a demotion, but it was a public loss of trust. The office buzzed quietly with speculation. Cass became increasingly erratic, short-tempered, defensive. She snapped at teammates. She micromanaged unnecessarily. She sent passive-aggressive emails copying leadership. Pressure exposes character, and hers was unraveling. One afternoon, she confronted me near the elevators. Her eyes were sharp, jaw tight. "You think you've won," she said. "I never said that. You're enjoying this. I'm doing my job." She leaned closer. "Careful. People who play hero don't always survive corporate politics." I met her gaze calmly. "Neither do people who manipulate." For a brief moment, something dark flashed behind her eyes. Then the elevator doors opened, and she walked away without another word. That night, I realized something important. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about reclaiming my integrity, about refusing to let lies define my story. And I wasn't done yet, because the real turning point hadn't even happened. It arrived 2 weeks later, unexpectedly, in the form of an email that Cass never intended anyone else to see. The email landed in my inbox at 6:42 a.m. I almost ignored it. My phone buzzed while I was still half asleep, the gray light of early morning barely leaking through the blinds. I assumed it was another automated notification or overnight system alert. I wouldn't have checked it until later, except I noticed the sender name. Cass. The subject line read, "Strategy Alignment, Confidential." My heart skipped. I hadn't been included in any recent strategy threads with her, which meant one thing. She had accidentally forwarded it to me. I opened it carefully. The email chain was long and damning. Cass was corresponding with an external consultant. Someone leadership didn't even know she had engaged. In the messages, she openly discussed shifting project narratives to protect her position. She talked about redirecting accountability, reframing failures, managing optics, and, worst of all, positioning me as a technical risk factor if things continue to unravel. One line burned into my brain. If I can make it clear that he resists leadership alignment, I'll have grounds to isolate him if needed. My hands trembled slightly. This wasn't rumor. This wasn't interpretation. This was intent, written in her own words. I didn't reply. I didn't forward it. I didn't screenshot impulsively. I did exactly what someone who had learned to be patient would do. I preserved the metadata, saved the original message, backed it up, documented timestamps, captured the header information, maintained chain integrity. Evidence only matters if it survives scrutiny. Then I waited. Not long, just long enough for the next move to reveal itself. By midday, Cass realized her mistake. She stormed across the office toward my desk. Her face was pale, eyes wide. "Did you get an email from me this morning?" she asked abruptly. I looked up calmly. "Which one?" Her jaw tightened. "The confidential thread." I paused slightly. "Yes." Her voice dropped. You weren't supposed to see that. I assumed it was intentional, I said evenly. Since you sent it. Her breathing became shallow. You need to delete it. I can't delete something that was sent to me. You don't understand. I understand exactly, I said quietly. For a moment she looked like a trapped animal. Then her expression hardened into something calculating. You show that to anyone and you'll destroy your own career along with mine. I met her gaze. Truth usually doesn't destroy the person who didn't create the lie. She stared at me for several seconds, then turned and walked away without another word. My heart raced long after she left. Not from fear, from clarity. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The next day I requested a private meeting with Greg. I didn't accuse. I didn't dramatize. I presented facts. I showed the email chain, the timestamps, the content, the language. Greg read silently. His face slowly changed from confusion to concern to something approaching disappointment. This is serious, he said finally. I know, I replied. He leaned back heavily. I need to escalate this. I understand. The investigation moved quickly. HR became involved. Leadership reviewed communication records. The external consultant relationship was examined. Patterns emerged, not just from this incident, but from historical behavior. The pieces connected. Cass was placed on administrative leave pending review. The office felt strangely quiet without her presence. No clicking heels, no loud laughter, no dominating voice in meetings. Just calm. People seemed to breathe easier. Conversations became more collaborative. Decisions felt clearer. It was like removing static from a signal. A week later, Greg called me into his office. He closed the door gently. She resigned, he said. I exhaled slowly. Not triumph, not relief, just closure. Leadership reviewed everything, Greg continued. They acknowledged that the promotion decision was influenced by incomplete and manipulated information. He hesitated. We owe you an apology. I nodded. We'd like to reopen the team lead role. My pulse quickened. This time properly. I didn't answer immediately, not because I was unsure, but because something had shifted inside me. I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I was choosing alignment. Yes, I said finally. I'd like to be considered. 2 weeks later, I was formally offered the position. No ceremony, no applause, just a quiet acknowledgement of truth correcting itself. When the announcement went out, people congratulated me sincerely, not out of politics, out of respect. But the real victory wasn't the title. It was the transformation. I no longer doubted my voice. I no longer underestimated the power of documentation. I no longer ignored red flags. I learned that silence doesn't always equal professionalism. Sometimes it enables manipulation. And I learned that integrity, when protected patiently, has a way of surfacing. Months later, as I settled into leadership, I made a promise to myself. Transparency would be non-negotiable. Credit would be shared. Feedback would be honest. Politics would not outweigh performance. Trust would be earned, not manufactured. Sometimes I still think about Cass, not with anger, with understanding. People who manipulate often operate from insecurity and fear. But that doesn't excuse the damage they cause. It only explains it. And sometimes the most powerful form of justice isn't revenge. It's truth, standing quietly but firmly in the light. If you've ever been underestimated, undermined, or overshadowed, don't give up. Your integrity is louder than you think. And eventually, it speaks. Before you go, don't forget to type your country in the comments, subscribe to the channel for more powerful real-life stories, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that truth always finds its way.